I used to have hoop dreams until I found out there were other ways to score. Welcome to the third episode of People in Policy, where we talk about political events, government issues, and how they affect you and everyone around you. And today's topic, which relates back to our intro, Iran. And
Did he?
and we're talking about, well, Iran used to have oil dreams until it found out there were other ways to score.
With nuclear weapons, which leads to our first question. What is the history of the conflict between Iran and Israel? And kind of what does the US have anything to do with this?
Yeah. So Iran has a history of its natural resources just kind of being like taken, and mostly oil. And they've been taken advantage of by Britain, by the United States, and it's led to a lot of like anti-American feeling as they've tried to nationalize their oil industry, and we've just kind of taken over, like America and the United States has just kind of taken over. And so a lot of their citizens don't really like America. And then in 1957, we signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with them that said that we would support them and their growth, and we'd give them resources for, growing their own nuclear industry and like nuclear program. And we kept on our word on that for a while until the Iran hostage crisis, where they took American people and they took them hostage, and the Iran-Iraq War, and we said that they were a state sponsor of terrorism. President Reagan said that, and so we just kind of cut our diplomatic ties with them for a while, and then like the toxic situationship that we came back after we realized that they were living a happy life with all of their nuclear weaponry that they were building. And we told them to slow that down, and we would loosen economic restrictions on them if they did that. And they made that agreement.
So another thing that's important to understand is why Iran has such a negative view towards the US and towards the Western world in general. Well, it all started in 1925. It was a cold and rainy night. No, it wasn't. Well, in 1925, British backed a coup, which led to the establishment of an authoritarian dynasty in Iran. And basically, they took out the parliament that was there. They took out the main government because Britain wanted access to the oil in Iran. And like Valina said only a few minutes ago, is that Iran has been abused.
Yeah,
by these Western countries into giving these Western countries oil, and they haven't been treated the way that they should. And hurt people hurt people. After World War II happened, Iran democratically elected someone to put in power, and he became their prime minister. Well, Britain wanted to get their hands dirty in Iran's soil and get some more oil. So they staged another coup, backed another coup, and was like, yo, we need another person in power that will support us and that will give us the oil that we need if we agree to back them from a political standpoint. So what they did was they went to the son of the person that they had previously put in power, and they essentially backed him. And what they did was they went and they tried to establish a dictatorship as quickly as possible, silencing people, mass killings, such and such. Well, through a mass arms transfers from the United States, the United States got involved into this revolution of sorts. Well, it wasn't a revolution then, but they got involved into this dictatorship and putting this in power. And they were able to send the CIA to specially train the police in Iran to deal with anybody who spoke up against the government. And by the 1970s, most of the leftist, liberal, nationalists, and other secular opposition leaders had been successfully repressed, whether it's through mass killings, like we said, or sending them into exile. And it was basically impossible for anybody to speak up against anything that was happening in the Iranian government. And essentially, right, people were silenced, but it just became too much. And in 1977 is when the revolution started, and they started striking and boycotting, tax refusal, very similar to the American Revolution War, right? This was their revolution. And so they were just going against so many other things, right? Oil workers quit their job, and that's a huge part of what Iran's economy is built on. So eventually got to a point where the country went to a standstill and they couldn't do anything because there was just revolution that was happening. And essentially, they sent their dictator into exile, and that was that.
I'm wondering how Israel kind of fits into all of this, you know?
Yeah, so next question that we're going to ask is, what has happened in this conflict so far within the past couple weeks, and why has it happened?
Yeah, so this conflict kind of began and like escalated in June 13th when Israel launched its attack on Iran at its nuclear bases and at kind of attacking nuclear scientists and missile factories in an effort to restrict the growth of their nuclear weaponry. And since then, President Trump decided to switch up on our diplomatic ties with Iran. And so we had this operation on June 21st called Operation Midnight Hammer. And it flew 125 United States military aircraft to three nuclear sites in Iran. So, kind of as a run through, it was like 18 hours, and the United States deployed most of its B 2 bombers over to the west and into the Pacific as a diversion. And then we went to some more B 2 bombers went to the east to Iran and then bombed two of the nuclear sites there. And then some submarines launched 24 missiles to another nuclear site called Isfahan. So that's three. And that's kind of what we've attacked so far. And there's not as much going on now we've kind of stopped doing anything about it. We're kind of like also at a standstill. Iran and Israel are still in their conflict, but after all of the destruction that these nuclear sites have undergone, we've kind of just stopped. We've even started having talks with Iran about it.
So, kind of what's happening is, Iran and Israel have been beefing for like forever. They were already at a tipping point, both of the countries. This really just, it was the last straw, the icing on the cake. I feel like those are oxymorons when you use them together, but they both fit, right? The US has claimed to try and take a middle ground. They don't want to be involved in another Middle Eastern war. They did such a great job of staying out of it, as Valina told us.
So the next question is, how might countries respond to these attacks?
Well, that's actually really important in countries' response in seeing whether this is going to be the start of World War III or not. I know that is a huge concern for so many civilians, of like, oh my gosh, what if it's World War III, right? Social media has gone in an uproar. People, from people like talking about it to people making jokes about it, everybody is, it's a hard idea to grasp, right?
Yeah.
And so I think everybody is trying to do the best that they can. But I think ultimately, right, if the US does decide to step out, we're looking at a de escalation in things, at least from a global standpoint. If the US does continue to get involved, and if you don't know, in the Cold War, Israel and the United States were allies, and Iran and Russia were allies, right? So if the United States somehow gets pulled into this, and then Russia also gets pulled into this, right? That's where we might start to see some problems. Some argue that if we were to go to war or have another world war, that it wouldn't look like the first two, where there was like bombing and stuff like that, because the use of nuclear weaponry doesn't make it much of a war. Let's just say that they destroy a lot of things. And so some people are speculating that a world war might look like cyber war or economic wars. But with this bombing, we're not really sure. Seeing as things have died down, it's not that much of a concern right now. I think the whole world is basically on edge because
Anything could happen regarding that, and that could also like make or break this whole thing, like if it's actually a war or if it de-escalates. It's mostly up to them, and also like foreign involvement. If other countries that have been allies previously team up and make it a lot bigger than it already is, that would be how we see where it would go. And a lot of countries are kind of fighting for like this de-escalation thing. They think that Iran doesn't really have the power to keep escalating it, or at least shouldn't keep escalating it because of its lack of power compared to like the US. And also, no one wants a World War III. So
the world has put so much effort into making sure that there wasn't going to be a world war, another one that, you know, it would be a shame to see all of that go to waste, to say the least. A lot of European countries um, are just, I mean, they've seen it firsthand, right? They're not, they don't want that to happen again. And you know what? Neither do the citizens of the U.S. or um, citizens in general, really, right? Because if there's a war, then people are getting killed, and that includes civilians, and it's bad for countries to have that kind of blood on their hands.
and so most countries are advocating for it not to, and they're hoping that the US and Iran can cool off. We know that Israel and Iran are still fighting, and they haven't said that they're going to stop yet. There hasn't been that ceasefire. So that could keep going, but with the United States involvement, it was a whole nother story. And it changed a lot of things up, and it was even bringing things like open to more foreign, like more countries coming into the conflict. And so de-escalating that would probably be the best decision in that case. So the next question is, what are the current perspectives over this conflict from all kinds of different people? The countries involved, President Trump, right and left, media.
So President Trump he's very frustrated with how this is going, how it's being handled by the media. He claimed that there was a ceasefire. Um, both countries came out and said that there was no ceasefire, and then continued bombing each other. That made President Trump very frustrated. He claimed that they had been fighting for so long that they no longer have any idea what they are doing. Pretty much that's the censored version.
He was heated enough to cuss.
Yeah, he did. He cursed in front of the media, which is not it's not a good look, and it definitely doesn't do a good job of bringing comfort to the citizens of the United States who are anxious about the sort of things that are happening, right? Because especially in war, you know, it's good for a leader to sort of come off as level-headed no matter how crazy things may be, for the sake of their citizens, right? Because we don't want to drive people crazy before anything actually happens, or like if
Yeah.
there's not that much of a potential for things to happen. um so yeah, the media is interesting, right? Because the media has the power to be influenced by those who are leaders and those who are in charge. So journalists might be fired for the things that they report, or are unhappy if the government is unhappy with the way that things are being perceived, right? People could lose their jobs. With war, right? If this does become a war, we see a lot of propaganda, which means the media is gonna be, we could expect the media to be heavily influenced in situations like this.
Yeah.
Because um people have brought up that a potential for war could arise, a potential of quote unquote proving whether Americans are like patriotic or not, and that going against war could be labeled as un-American or like unpatriotic. So the media definitely has a lot of potential to be influenced, and that's why this is kind of difficult, because because it is in the early stages, right? People are, and news sources are just like reporting it as soon as it happens. It's hard to kind of like get a grasp at like what's actually happening, getting the timeline straight, getting the narrative straight, because as we all three countries are claiming different things right now, which is very confusing for the citizens who are trying to figure out as to what this means for like the average person, right? Not from a
Yeah.
political standpoint or from, a higher up, but for people like you and me, what could this possibly mean? And that's kind of difficult to grasp at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like foreign countries, they've kind of, oh, like obviously Iran is really upset about this, probably like the most. The Iranian Atomic Energy Organization has came out and said this is a quote barbaric violation end quote of international law. So we can see a big change in the way that obviously they view the U.S. and our like ties with them, how they've been changed because of this like threat, and they've come out and threatened certain cities in the United States. So we can see where the media could be in uproar, where the United States, Iran can be kind of tense. And like experts, they say that this will only set Iran back like a few months. So our attacks on their nuclear sites won't actually help like hurt them that much. And so in that case, there's like an expectance that they could just come back and they could retaliate in some way. And so they're trying to urge the United States to like bring back their like reestablish their diplomatic ties with Iran before that kind of thing happens. And so we can see that from like a foreign like international affairs like standpoint, are like we're still back in that tense spot where we always have been, where it's like, is there going to be retaliation? Do they not like us? Do they like us? Love me not.
I think more than anything, this is going to affect economies, because Iran is such a big part of um, oil, but they also have access to a waterway that um, transports 20% of the global oil. And so if Iran decides to shut that down, it could change a lot of things economically, globally, right?
Yeah.
Not just for the US, but for a lot of other countries as well. So I think, if anything, we're going to see more of an economical effect
Yeah,
than.
like starting right now, that's probably what we're gonna see, as well as like the media, I feel like out of all the topics we talked about so far, the media has been most opinionated about this one and has been kind of like drastic, like jumping to conclusions and things like that. So we're telling you that like it's not 100%, it's not even, I'd say, like likely that World War III is going to start from this kind of thing. But there's always a chance because it is a war and we are getting involved in it. Um, but overall, like some see this as somewhat positive. They say, like the right, they see this as maybe a little bit positive. Obviously, everyone's like equally confused because this is not what President Trump said in his campaign. And this is kind of a switch up on that. But the right maybe sees this as a little positive, an act against terrorism, an act against nuclear power. And that's kind of like what they think, or the left views this as, unnecessary and harmful to diplomatic relations. And overall, the media in general, everyone thinks this is the start of World War III. And they, like, not everyone's super well informed or very educated about this kind of thing. Um, yeah, it's three countries involved in a war. And the biggest things that could happen are any retaliation from Iran or any involvement of foreign countries.
I think it's important to keep in mind that no country wants World War III, right? I think um, that's even been stated, right? War is unnecessary, especially on a global scale, right? You're pulling in a lot of people that were never involved in the original conflict, right? Um, and the way that allies are set up right now and just, all that sort of stuff, right? It's, it's not a good thing. It's bad for the economy of the country because all of the efforts now have to be focused on war, and everybody has to pitch in, and it costs a lot of money. And yeah, we've seen it, we've done it once, twice, hated it both times, and it's unnecessary for us to go into it again. And that's why um I feel like it won't escalate any more than this, at least from the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about like who this is impacting, it seems obviously mostly it's impacting Iran right now. It's impacting their civilians because there have been civilian deaths there, and so they also can't be refugees over here, as we talked about in the travel ban last week. So it's obviously going to hurt them probably the most, and also their nuclear sites and things like that. And it also affects us. We're kind of all connected over fear. Everyone equally in the nation, in the world, is equally connected by the fact that we're scared of this kind of thing, and we think that it could bring about like further escalation and violence and war, which is something that we all don't want to happen. So that's how you're affected. Even if you don't feel personally affected, that's how you're affected. It's the fear, it's that being scared, it's the media, and that's all going to get to everyone. So everyone's going to struggle with that kind of thing. Or maybe like also the economy and that aspect of it. Everyone in the world is probably going to struggle with their like oil economies in some way because of this kind of thing, since Iran has such like a higher like a power hold over that kind of industry. So those are kind of how it's going to actually affect like United States citizens or people across the world, who aren't like directly involved in this kind of thing. They're not, military members. They're not government officials, of Israel, Iran, or the United States. So kind of just talking about the average people who this impacts.
Yeah, so obviously the civilians of Israel and Iran are impacted. They've already faced some casualties, right? Um, and like Valina mentioned, the travel ban on Iran makes it so that the civilians there can't come to the US, at least, which, it's a tough situation for them to be in. It's not a good look at us, on us.
Yeah.
Um but really neither has this whole situation, kind of getting involved when we didn't really need to be. But everybody is viewing this differently, and essentially what's happening right now is that we just need to let it play out and see if it actually becomes something that we need to worry about. I think the media has done a media, as in the news, but also as in social media, has done a really good job at scaring people and,
Mm-hmm.
inciting fear, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Fear causes people to act differently,
Yeah.
kind of not the way that they would normally act, right?
Mm-hmm.
They might start buying things as if they were preparing for
Yeah.
war.
Making rash decisions and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is, we're not there yet. So it's more of like, wait things out, see what happens, and hopefully it doesn't affect anyone else more than it has. And I think just having, keeping a positive mindset until then is definitely going to help.
Yeah, and we hope this like shines a new light because we even like couldn't understand why this could possibly be happening or how the United States has any relation to this kind of thing. So that historical background is a really big part of this. And along with the fact that we're just like trying our best to educate you, get an understanding of what's been going on, and then know that right now it's not that big. It's not totally that big of a deal. But there is always that chance, and there's always a chance that it could just like de-escalate, and we might never ever talk about this again. Yeah,
That's what we're hoping for, right? We don't want to have a part two of
yeah.
this
Part two, World War
podcast.
Three. You can hear the bombs outside. Always other ways to score. Let's say that. Yay!
Amen. All right, that brings us to the end of our episode on people and policy.